So like I said, we've got a packed agenda today. So we're going to start with Anna Hope from Ecomotive Bristol. Anna, well, I think her experience sort of speaks for itself, and I don't think I've got time to sort of go through everything that she's done in her career, but she's an accredited community-led housing advisor. She's a founder of Ecomotive, a community organisation in Bristol, a self-builder at Ashley Vale self-build project in Bristol, and a researcher. And I'm sure that she will sort of introduce herself and tell us all about the work that she's been doing on self-build in Bristol. So over to you, Anna.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome, and lovely to see so many faces here. Welcome everyone. So yes, I'm dialing in from Bristol, and I'm just going to see if I can share this presentation now. Oh, can you enable me to share my screen, please?
Bear with me. There you go. Should work now.
Lovely, thanks. Oh, okay, great. Hang on. Great. So here we go. Yeah. So I've been asked to talk today about self-build in relation to community-led housing. Without quite knowing who everyone is that's coming to the call, I'm assuming that you're involved in some way in some kind of community-led housing project. So that's the context I'm going to be talking about self-build, but obviously self-build does apply also to individuals wanting to do a project. And I'm talking, as Casey said, from the point of view of Ecomotive, but I'm also representing another company that partners with Ecomotive called Snug Homes. And I'll talk a little bit at the end about our latest project we've been working on in Bristol with the Snug Home. So, can I just start? Ooh. Sorry, tech. Trying to see how I start the show, and it's not letting me do it.
If you go to slideshow on the top.
Yeah, it's just that on my screen I can't see it because I've got all the Zoom controls in the way. Maybe I can drag them out of the way. Oh yeah, there we go. Great. Thanks.
The joys of tech.
There we go. We'll get the hang of it eventually. Okay, so and this picture here is the project that I was involved in setting up, and where I still live today in Bristol, Ashley Vale self-build, which I'll talk about a little bit here. But there you go, a nice little kind of overview of a community-led self-build project. I wanted to start off with talking just about what we mean by self-build, particularly because I think there's different ways you can look at self-build, and I think it's worth clarifying what some of these different forms are. So in my mind, there's a couple of different ways you can look at it. You can look at it in the way of the responsibility that that someone takes on when they're doing a self-build project. So the self-builder, if you like, is the person who is responsible for overseeing the budget, basically holding the whole project, but also they're taking the risk. But doesn't mean they don't have to do the building work themselves. And anyone who's watched grand designs on television, often the actual self-builder isn't getting their hands dirty, but they're dealing with all the different contractors and all the nightmares that kind of churns up. So there's the level of responsibility for the project management, but also self-build can mean literally the getting hands-on and doing the building work as well. And particularly when we talk about community-led housing, that can mean that the self-builders aren't necessarily responsible for project managing the project, but they're actually doing some of the physical work. So that's two different ways you can look at it. And equally, self-build can be an individual home on your own plot, or it could be a larger plot that's got lots of different subplots. Each person builds their own home separately, but it could also be a group project. And often in the case of community self-build, you've got people collaborating on each other's homes, and there'll be some kind of group organization that is responsible for coordinating the project and potentially even owning or part owning some of the homes. But in terms of a group project, self-build has the implication then that the residents are getting hands-on in some way. The residents themselves might not be actually doing the project management. That could be a separate organization like a community land trust, but the residents are definitely going to be involved in some way, even if it's quite a light touch way. Oh, I can see there's someone in the waiting room there. So when we're talking about community-led self-build, I mean, if you look at different genres of housing, if you look at community-led housing being kind of one sphere, And you look at affordable housing as being one sphere, and then self-build. We're looking at the point where these overlap. And what I'm trying to show in this slide here is just simply that community-led self-build may or may not be affordable housing. It can still be community-led and not affordable, although typically these days, most people are looking to community-led housing projects to be something that does help deliver affordable housing because there's such a need there. And in the case, I'll talk about our project in Bristol, which actually didn't end up being affordable housing, but it's still very much community-led. So there's some different ways, as with any community-led housing project, there's different ways that projects can start. So they could be led by a wider neighbourhood group, like forming a community land trust or some other kind of community anchor organisation. It could be led by the people who actually want to live there. So people coming together and saying, we want to build our own homes ourselves, like a cooperative. And it can also be done by some kind of specialist provider, or kind of initiated at least by a specialist provider, for example, organisations that provide support to particular groups in need. In Bristol, we've had a project that involved ex-servicemen in building their own homes. I want to do run through 4 case studies of different ways that this can look. So I've got this kind of two axes here that I've got, one of which is looking at whether people are individually building their own home, or whether they're collaborating collectively on building all the homes. And the other axis, the horizontal axis, is looking at whether it's a kind of really quite a full self-build process, or whether it's self-finish, which would mean that, say, you have a contractor that builds the main part of the homes, and then people are involved in doing some of the finishing touches. So I'm going to show 4 case studies that illustrate some of these different approaches that groups can take. So Ashley Vale, just to say here, so Ashley Vale is an example of a project where it was full self-build, and each individual was responsible, or each household was responsible for their own home. So there wasn't this sense of everyone working on everyone else's homes, although actually that did happen kind of organically, but it wasn't a kind of a mandated part of the scheme. And this project initiated in the year 2000, buying a brownfield site in fairly central in Bristol. It was initiated by a group of local residents who saw a site coming up for sale and wanted to help improve it and give the opportunity for people to own their own home more affordably. And I know my time's very limited, so I can't go into this project in a lot of detail, but actually if anyone's interested, I could send a link after this workshop that could go out, which just shows a 12-minute video, which is a really beautiful video of this site and kind of shows it a lot better. But basically how this project worked was there were 3 phases. There was a self-build phase of 20 or 22 odd homes kind of around the edge of the site, where people bought their own plot, freehold, and they built their own home according to their own budget and timeline. And each of those plots functioned as an individual self-build. And then later phases of the project, and you can see in the bottom photo there's a row of bungalows joined together. Now that's an example of self-finish. Those homes came later, and the community group paid a local contractor to build the shells of the house, and then people bought the unfinished shell and completed all the internal works themselves. And we also did a renovation of an old office building where we used the same approach. And the advantage of this is that people got to make their own decisions about, at least for the bungalows, the internal layout, and for the self-builds, people got to make decisions on the design of their home, and they got to choose their own budget. A downside is that we weren't able to provide any affordable housing on the site, and that was to do with the housing association pulling out. And unfortunately now homes go for a lot of money. However, it has provided an atmosphere in the community where people kind of have this real sense of pride and ownership over their neighbourhood, and a lot of people gained real skills that they went on to earn an income from the building skills that they'd learned. So the second project is an example of also individual builds, but using a completely self-finish approach, Orwell Housing Association in Norwich. And this looks, I mean, obviously, like from the picture, a lot more of a kind of conventional style of scheme. But this is an example of an approach if your community housing group wants to provide an opportunity for people to do a self-build, but kind of in a more affordable and streamlined way, so people didn't have to actually design and build their whole home. But they were given a half-finished home and they could complete it themselves. But there were some rules around this because it was shared, either shared ownership or shared equity. So people have purchased 50% of their home and then the rest is owned by the housing association. So that's an example. An advantage of that would be the project could happen kind of in a very streamlined way, and you obviously get the kind of a standardized finish on the outside of the homes, but people still get to own their home more affordably. They save because they're putting in some of the sweat equity themselves. And they're also then again kind of getting to learn the kind of the building skills and put that mark on their home, which is really quite important. Now here's an example of a full self-build project, which was done as a group build. Hedgehog in Brighton. This was quite a famous scheme from the 1990s, and it featured on Grand Designs a couple of times. So you can pull that up on YouTube if you want to see more about it. Now in this scheme, it was done, I think, by a housing cooperative that partnered with a housing association. And this was very closely coordinated in that because it was built from scratch, and because the people actually weren't going to own their homes, they were only ever going to rent them from the cooperative. They put in, they had to put in a standard amount of time each. And so that was very intensive. And they were learning on the job. It took 2.5 years of commitment for people to build the homes. But people didn't have to bring their own capital. And that was really important because often with the self-build, I mean, self-build does tend to be more in progress to ownership rather than rent. So this is a really good example of showing that actually you don't have to have the capital to put down a deposit or to be able to raise a mortgage yourself if you do it in this way. And I believe that all the original residents are still there. I mean, it formed a very strong sense of community, but I mean, it's given the intensity of the work involved. And I think particularly now, I would say probably back in the 90s, the benefit system was probably a bit more lenient in terms of its requirement, people not being required to be constantly seeking work. So these people were on benefits building their homes, and they didn't have to, probably a lot of them didn't have to do work, certainly full-time work. I think the situation's a bit different now, and certainly this kind of approach seems less popular now, I would say. But that's why I think there's been kind of more of a move towards this idea of self-finish. And I wanted to show you the last case study delivered by Bristol CLT, 325 Fishponds Road. And this is a project that we, as Ecomotive, supported the CLT with doing the self-finish project management. So effectively, the CLT designed and did most of the construction for these 12 homes. Some were renovation of an old school building and some were new build. And then the group of residents that were coming in to finish the homes, we had the role to train them and coordinate them, and they all worked on each other's homes, a bit like Hedgehog, but it was much lighter touch. Each resident had to put in something like, I think, 300 to 500 hours over the course of a few months period. And they did some more kind of straightforward tasks, basically painting and decorating, fitting the kitchens, tiling the kitchens and bathrooms, and laying the floors. And their hours were recorded, and I think they put in slightly variable hours, but according to how many hours each household put in, they earned sweat equity in their homes. And some of those homes are shared ownership and some of them are rented. In case of the rented homes, I think when they leave, they may get, either they get money off their rent, or when they leave, they get a payment back. I'm not totally sure about that. But there are different ways that you can look at taking into account the sweat equity. And the sweat equity of the shared ownership homes, people effectively got to own an extra percentage share in their home according to the amount of work they put in on the build process. And what we found through doing this approach, and particularly ourselves as Ecomotive, having had the experience of seeing the Ashley Vale project and how the full self-build, the effect that that had on the residents and the quality of the community, but then also looking at some of these more lighter touch approaches like self-finish, became obvious that actually people don't have to be doing the full self-build in order to really create that sense of investment. And even in this project here, when people weren't even owning their homes, the fact that they still had the opportunity to make choices about the finish of their homes and feel like they'd learned new skills and done it themselves gave this real sense of pride and self-confidence, as well as bringing the community together. So I would say I would really recommend this self-finish approach, actually for any project. And the CLT is now, well, CLT then went on to set up another project, which it's no longer involved with, sadly, but that's a project of 50 homes. And we're now just about to get on site with that. So we're exploring what it looks like to scale up to doing a 50 home self-finish project. Watch this space. So finally, I'm just going to show you a snug.
Is that me that's lost connection, or is that Anna that's lost connection?
It's Anna.
It's Anna, is it? Right, okay. Perhaps we'll give her a minute.
Home in a moment. I just have my internet's obviously just gone down. Let me know when you can hear me.
Yes, you're back.
Great. I just was checking. I can't see the time. How am I doing? I've got about 1 or 2 minutes left.
Yeah, absolutely fine. We've got plenty of room for a bit of going over. That's fine. Great,
thanks. I just wanted to mention snug homes because this is something a concept that we developed through Ecomotive, but it now is being delivered by a separate company in partnership. The idea of the snug home is that we had over the years lots of people coming to us saying that they would like to do a self-build project, but they didn't have the time or perhaps the budget, or they didn't want to take on the risk. But they wanted to build a small, but also like the size of the home. So some people wanted to build like a tiny home, or at least like something that was kind of perhaps smaller than what was on the market, and particularly community groups saying, well, we want to build some small homes together and have some shared facilities. And then because you have this minimum space, national space standard, which actually, I mean, the home, that's quite large actually, but if you were forming a co-op or co-housing group and you wanted to share facilities, each household could have a smaller home, which would save money. But also having a kind of higher quality of outside space makes that actually quite an attractive option. So we've designed the snug home with all of those kind of things in mind, and with the idea of trying to make self-build and custom build, self-finish kind of more accessible to people. So this is a picture of the first home that we've just built, and this is a 1-bed home. We've just built this for a client in Bristol, but we're now gearing up to build more. And the idea of the snug home is it's a modular home, and this 1-bed one comes in 4 modules, 2 on the upper floor and 2 on the lower floor. And it's volumetric, so the module will be delivered to site all in one piece, and then they're connected together. And we've tried to do this in a way that uses the most ecological materials possible. So rather than most modular homes tend to have a steel frame, and they might have solid insulation. We've done it with a timber frame using I-beams and with blown recycled newspaper insulation, and trying to basically use all the materials that we can find, sourcing with sustainability in mind wherever possible, as well as local supply chain. So that's the concept. But also as part of it, what we wanted to do is create this kind of the factory as a community facility. So the idea being that that the factory is embedded in a location where local people can come and get involved, whether that's in training up and learning building skills or coming in and learning about ecological building. And we've been running workshops from our site based in Lockleys in Bristol. We've been running events, well, at least pre-COVID, we were running events, getting local people in, getting families in and children to learn about different aspects of building, and having open evenings and film nights and things like that. And we've had a volunteer training program. Derek on the right there, he joined us as a volunteer, and he's now employed as one of our builders. So he's been a great success story. And this is one of the frames going up for the modules. And this is what it looks like when it's being lifted into place. It's all very exciting because we'd never done this before. And there it is finished. And so this is just an idea. It was then finished on site. So the cladding was finished on site as well as some of the internals, but we're working towards having as much finished as possible before it comes to site, so it will minimise impact on the build site. But also with the idea for self-finish being that the person who was going to, the buyer or the person who's going to live there would have the chance to do some of the finishing work themselves, and we can support them, give them a manual or give them training. And we're hoping to do some community projects with snug homes. So we've been working with Lockleys Neighbourhood Trust in Bristol, who have just been allocated a site by Bristol City Council through their community-led housing land disposal programme. And we're working up a scheme for 5 snug homes where we'll get the residents involved in finishing the homes. So we're really excited about that. And yeah, I'll just finish off with a picture there of what it looks on the inside. But yeah, please I'm done there. So please fire out any questions, and I'm happy to send links, hopefully that can be circulated after the meeting if anyone wants more info. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna, that was great. And yeah, we're happy to share any links and obviously send Anna's presentation out as well for anybody that wants to see it. I think we're all very jealous of some of the legislation in Bristol in terms of the land disposal for community-led housing schemes. So yeah, we often look to Bristol for inspiration. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. So I'm going to move swiftly on. I'm hoping that we've got somebody from Cornwall CLT in the room. I'm just checking through everybody if they are able to share their story with us.
Hello, it's me, Allan Fox.
Hi, Allan, how are you?
Hi there, I'm good, thanks. Apologies, I haven't got any slides today because I'm a kind of a last minute insert into this, and I know several people that are attending here from previous experience. I'm the secretary of Cornwall CLT, Cornwall Community Land Trust. That's a voluntary role, and in my paid employment, I work for a small housing association. In fact, the subsidiary of a small housing association that specialises in rural development. So, having previously been an employee of Cornwall CLT, which is where some of you will have met me before. Yeah. So I think you wanted me to talk about some self-build schemes and partnerships with RPs. So I'll start actually with partnerships with RPs. Cornwall Community Land Trust is actually an RP now. It became an RP last year, and this is really partly to deal with developing small rural schemes that our usual RP partners aren't interested in developing, and being able to access Homes England grant funding, which is obviously important in making some of the projects stack up from a viability point of view. I guess since Cornwall CLT became incorporated in 2007, most of the projects have been, the majority of its 265 homes have been in partnership with housing associations. Initially, it was with Cornwall Rural Housing Association, whereby basically they did the rental homes on projects, and we did the homes for sale, and they financed the project up until practical completion, and then we sold the houses on a back-to-back arrangement, and I project managed the projects for the housing association. So it was a kind of a synergy between the organisations, in the sense that we often found through the community development role, found really good projects in rural areas, and in particular high value coastal villages, and helped to provide mixed tenure projects tailored to local needs, and also bring in subsidy in order to enable their delivery. However, some of the community land trust projects we did were standalone and had no RP involvement whatsoever, and I'll come to those in a moment. More recently, a lot of our bigger schemes at Cornwall CLT have been using a fairly tried and tested model whereby all the community development side of it is carried out by either Cornwall CLT or one of its local CLTs. The secure the site, secure either the long lease or a freehold of the site, go get the planning permission to detail planning, and then lease the whole scheme to the housing association. And there's 2 or 3 housing associations we work with on those kind of projects. Cornwall CLT covers the whole of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. And as I said, we have done quite a few projects, and so have our sovereign CLTs that we work with that are standalone, and they have mainly either been self-built projects, self-finished projects, or homes for sale. It's been a bit more challenging to deliver those standalone projects without subsidy, because unless you've got RP involvement or you're an RP yourself, you can't access the Homes England subsidy, and it's become more and more difficult to access local authority subsidy because they tend to marry up with housing association schemes, so that basically they end up being mixed funded. Some money from Homes England, some money from the local authority to actually bridge the gap. However, we've got some projects in the pipeline where we are getting some assistance from local authorities, and particularly on the Isles of Scilly, where they're very keen to promote community self-build. And we have a couple of projects in the pipeline. We're in partnership with the Isles of Scilly Council. One on the main island at St Mary's, which is in planning at the moment for 12 homes. At the moment, the options are a complete build from scratch, or more like the kind of scheme that Anna was talking about a moment ago, a part build, a part finish project. And we're looking at those options at the moment. But the important thing there is that the council are paying for the planning, council are providing the land, and if necessary, some of the subsidy. So that's going to be an important development from our point of view. The other project we're currently engaged in is providing one single dwelling on one of the off islands at St Martin's, and that is really a very, very challenging project to make that one stack up. So we shall see how these go over the next year or so, and no doubt there'll be the progress will be documented on our website for those that are interested. In terms of self-build generally, what we haven't actually, we did deliver 3 projects since our inception in Cornwall, and all of those, all 3 of them are on rural exception sites in areas of outstanding natural beauty, and all of them are 100% affordable. However, they do vary slightly, and I'll explain that in a moment. And interestingly enough, the last one that was delivered was completed in 2013. So in 7 years, we haven't actually succeeded in delivering another self-build scheme. Having said that, we do have a scheme at the pre-application phase at the moment in Rock, which hopefully will succeed in delivering a further 12. And there's a lot of interest with local community groups in the community self-build model, and there's a lot of discussion as to the best vehicle for delivering that, particularly from a sort of financing point of view, as to whether it's a community build from scratch, a build to weather tight and then finish from weather tight, or whether it's a self-finish, looking at perhaps, you know, getting a building to building regulation sign off, which means that you could be doing all the internal decoration, the internal architraves, skirting boards, fitting the kitchen out, because for building regulation sign off, all you need is a kitchen sink basically with running water. So it's looking at those kind of permutations and what is the best fit for those particular groups, because financing self-built schemes, and particularly community built ones, has been quite challenging, particularly in areas where we also have a Section 106 agreement on the planning permission. So just if I quickly run through the ones that have been delivered. First of all, in Rock in Cornwall, it's one of the most expensive coastal resorts in Cornwall, when we were first looking at a community self-build scheme back in 2008, it was the average house prices there then were £600,000 a house, and now you know, it's difficult to find anything less than £1 million. So, you know, I think the most expensive house I saw was 7.8 million. So it, you know, it's where all the celebrities go, and they buy up everything, and they basically knock them down, and they build, you know, houses that look like Terminal 5 of Heathrow Airport, you know, and mission. But anyway, it's one of the local farmers, you know, was passionate about trying to provide some housing for local people, you know, local working families. And no affordable housing had been provided in the parish for a long time. So that was the sort of start of it. The Community Land Trust was set up. We helped set it up. They embarked on their first project, 12 bungalows, 3 and 2 bed, with a community build. And we managed to get finance. We managed to get finance from the council to set the Community Land Trust up. And we managed to get finance from the local authority, which was interest-free, to deliver the build, because of the issues relating to drawing down mortgages as they were going through the build. It was important to have that finance available. We a project manager was appointed that was a local builder that organised the self-builders, so that it was organising the sort of work, it was organising the ordering of materials, etc., to ensure that the flow of work was kept on programme. And none of the houses could be occupied until all of the houses were occupied. And there was a sharing of the workload, so people with no skills were able to contribute in other ways. All the applicants were selected at the start, complied with the council's local needs policies in Section 106. So that was important, that to have a allocations policy that worked, and that all the purchases were using the freehold resale covenant methodology, which basically took a lot of the restrictions from the Section 106, put them into the sale as covenants. It was managed by the CLT, and each of the purchasers paid a small management fee to the CLT of £150 a year, which, you know, is similar to what ground rent would be on an affordable sale. So that was really successful, and it's a well-documented project. Each of the self-builders was able to have a sweat equity of about £20,000 that was put into the mix. So that brought it up to the level which was the, I think at the time was about 105,000 for a 3-bedroom and 85,000 for a two-bedroom bungalow. And that was then fixed as a percentage of open market value. And that's basically the covenant. It can never be sold at more than that percentage of open market value to a qualifying person. And that's worked, and there's been resales. And that came out at about 34% of open market value. When we came to the second phase, because that was so oversubscribed and so successful, we had to look at it in a slightly different way. By then, the local authority decided that it wanted some rented housing as well on the scheme. So of the second phase of 12, 4 of them had to be affordable rental properties. And so basically the carrot of that was that the council would also give the CLT some subsidy towards the self-build homes, so 8 self-build, 4 for rent. So Cornwall Rural Housing Association were the partner. They were doing the rental homes. They received Homes and Communities Agency grant for the rental homes. The CLT received the grant for the CLT homes. It was a fairly low level of grant, about £20,000 per unit, but it all helped. Cornwall Rural Housing Association basically contracted on a design and build basis to provide weather-tight homes to the CLT's design. All of them detached bungalows, 3 and 2 bedroom. So all the infrastructure was put in by the housing association. The homes were built to weather tight, meaning that the windows, the doors, the roofs were on, but not the exterior cladding or block work, nor were the houses fitted out at all on the interior. Now the important thing is that there was a handover at the point of weather tight. My project managed the whole scheme from a high level. And then the CLT self-builders took over finishing the houses off with the same project manager that did phase 1. However, drawing down mortgages became more difficult. So at that point, the Housing Association, Cornwall Rural, agreed to lend the CLT enough money to actually finish the houses off at a very low rate of interest. From memory, it was about 3.6%. So compare that with the sort of development interest you might get, from a bank, even an ethical bank, and it's low at development stage. And at the point when everything was finished, exactly like the other one, all the self-builders did a back-to-back purchase and drew down their mortgages, did the back-to-back purchase. So it was Housing Association, CLT, self-builder, and the covenants were in place, and that protects it so there's that long-term stewardship role that the CLT has. And again, it was delivered successfully. It's a lovely scheme. It's not to everybody's taste because they're detached bungalows, but they're super houses. And an interesting feature of that scheme, I think, was that one of the self-builders was a blind woman, and all the self-building for her was carried out by relatives, by proxy, and that's always been a feature of these schemes, that if you can't deliver the self-build element, then a relative can do it on your behalf. So that from the point of view of outcomes, it was a very successful scheme altogether. And if you want to see some photographs and details, you can go to our website, www.cornwallclt.org, and look at communities and projects, and then you can go and have a look at a selection of the projects. There's a drop-down box with projects. So that Cornwall Saminva CLT, which is the one at Rock, is now looking at another project. That's the one that's in the pre-app, which is nearby. It's over the road from Dingles Way, and we're working with them at Cornwall CLT, and the pre-app is in, and we're now moving on to the next phase. The big argument we have at the moment with the local authority is that the CLT want it to be 100% discounted sale project. The local authority want rental element in it, and there's that tension, that argument at the moment. Argument maybe is too strong a word. That kind of tension, that discussion that's going on, because it is possible to get 100% sale projects, but you have to provide the local authority with compelling evidence. So the other project that we delivered, which was the one that was completed in 2013, was in St Justin Roseland, another very high value coastal idyll. And many of you have probably heard of St Moors. Well, that's within the same parish, and St Justin Roseland is the next village along. And it's in this particular case another local farmer who was passionate about trying to do something for local working families, made available the land at £3,000 a plot. The local authority actually bought the land and provided it to the self-builders for £1 a plot. Also, the local authority financed the setting up costs of the CLT, and part funded the project manager, who helped organise the self-build phase. It's slightly different to the Saminva experience, because although it was a community build and none of the houses were occupied until they were finished, the self-builders were all tradespeople, and high-end ones at that. They're used to working on millionaires' properties, fantastic quality of workmanship. So all of them have the full set of skills, and in some senses twice over. And in amongst it also, a couple of one of the partners of one of the self-builders is a civil engineer working, in Falmouth, and another one an architect, a junior architect in the practice. So they all qualified, from the affordability criteria and the local needs criteria. So they had the full set of skills, and really the project manager, it was all about, again, the logistics of getting the supplies in on time, getting the best price for materials, etc., etc. And also they had some savings, which meant that they didn't need some of the finance that Saminva CLT needed in order to get to the point where they could draw down their mortgages. So it was they managed to organise some development finance and their mortgages through one of the ethical lenders, and it was quite a smooth process from start to finish. I guess the biggest problem we had on it was dealing with highways, because they wanted a big contribution. I don't know if in Wales you get advance payment codes, but where we have schemes, the local highways authority wants a payment deposited to make sure that you finish all the road off and everything. And it's because lots of private developers have built the schemes, sold the houses, and then disappeared, and the road's not finished, and so somebody has to come in and pick up the pieces at the end of it. And it's usually the local authority. So we obviously couldn't afford to pay that money, and it was about having quite a robust discussion about not paying it. So that was the main issue. So that's a quick run. Again, that was using the discounted sale methodology with robust covenants, where the ongoing stewardship role is through the CLT, and St Justin Roseland was six completed detached 3-bedroom houses. So that's a quick run through of our experience. And as I say, we haven't delivered one since 2013, but that's something that looks as though it's changing because of the popularity of the model or variations of it. And very interested in what Anna was saying, just before me, on looking at, at what kind of level of self-build is actually applied to the different projects.
Definitely. Well, thank you for that, Alan, and thanks for joining us at such last minute, and a great run through of all the projects that you've been involved with. I know that my colleague Alan has put a link to your website in the chat, so hopefully everyone can go and have a look at those individual projects, and I will send it out as well following the meeting so everyone can have a good look. And I think there are obviously some similarities with communities in Wales in terms of really high house prices in tourist areas, so I'm sure there's lots to learn for us as we sort of start our self-build journey. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to send everyone into a breakout room, just because I don't want everyone to be talked at for an hour and a half. So I'm going to divide you all up so you can all have a chat and discuss what we've just heard essentially, and think about some of the lessons that we can learn from for Wales from Bristol and Cornwall. Like I said, as we start thinking more and more about self-build in Wales. So if you bear with me 1 second, and I will open those breakout rooms, and hopefully everyone can have a good chat. So it's going to be for about 10 minutes. So hopefully you'll all get a chance to have a good natter and find out who's in the room with you, so you can all meet each other. Right, there we go. See you shortly. If you need to shoot off, Anna, then please feel free to do so. I know you're a busy lady, so if you need to shoot off.
Oh. Well, it's I just if anyone needed me to answer a question, I could I could do that. I wasn't quite sure what the structure would be. Does it help for me to stay for a few minutes?
Well, everyone's gone into a breakout room for 10 minutes and then they're coming back. So if you do want to stay for a little bit, then more than welcome.
Maggie here. I'm not in a breakout room.
Sorry, Maggie. I don't know why that's.
So it might be worth pausing the recording for the moment.
Welcome back, everybody. Everyone's coming back slowly. Obviously, still got room to a chat in. There we go. Right, welcome back, everybody. I think everybody is back in the room with us. I hope everybody had a good opportunity to chat and get to know everybody else that's on the call today. So next up, we've sort of heard a lot about things happening in England, in Bristol and in Cornwall, but we're turning our attention to Wales. So we've got a bit of a double act, I think, now coming up. So we've got Dai Davies and Arfon Hughes, who are going to be talking to us about the Self-Build Wales programme. So it's the Welsh Government programme. Obviously, I'm not going to explain too much because I don't want to steal your thunder. But both Dai and Arfon have got many years experience in the housing world and are very keen supporters of community-led housing. So I will let them get on with it, and hopefully we can all learn a bit more about Self-Build Wales. over to you.
Okay, I think I'm kicking off in the presentation. As was mentioned, you've got 2 for the price of 1. I think what we're going to do is just run through the slides first, and then perhaps Arfon and myself can answer questions at the end, together with perhaps questions to the other speakers. So if I start off sharing the screen with you. Okay, are you all seeing this?
Perfect.
Yeah, good. Okay, I'll introduce myself, and perhaps Arfon can introduce himself straight after. I currently work as mainly a self-employed consultant. My background is a housing, environmental health consultancy, also a chartered surveyor. In the past life, I've worked as in private sector housing and worked as director of development for a local housing association. So I come from mainly a development background, towards housing. Arfon, I don't know if you want to just say Shwmai.
Hello, Shwmai, yeah. Nice to see a few familiar faces from Cornwall, Alan. And yes, I'm past work I have been doing is as a rural housing enabler. And that's in the Gwynedd area for a number of years. And lately, before I finished with being a rural housing enabler in Conway and in Anglesey as well. The work I'm doing now is as a consultant, and I'm just helping small groups with the Development Trust of Wales, and also with Wales Cooperative Centre, hopefully in the future. So yes, that's the type of work I've been doing, mostly working with communities, community councils, to try and identify housing need and trying to interpret that need into working with housing associations and local authorities in those 3 areas I mentioned as to what could be done to address those needs that we found in the community. So basically that's what I've been doing.
Okay, right. The slides we're going to show you are come from Development Bank of Wales, so we're just giving an overview of the scheme itself, entitled Self-Build Wales. And at the end, I'll try and give you a bit of an overview. I've done some work on behalf of communities creating homes in looking to see how the scheme can be adapted for particular use within the movement. And having some discussions now with the bank and hopefully Welsh Government to see if there is potential for further adaptation of the scheme to make it suitable for the sector that we're dealing with today. So just as an overview then, it's a new scheme. It's just over a year old. That was launched by the Development Bank in conjunction with Welsh Government. The scheme is targeted to building homes, building your own homes or being self-build, and a significant amount of money allocated towards the scheme. £40 million available to fund the scheme, but on a recycled basis, hence the 40 million can actually turn into £200 million of available funding for self-build. Little bit of information, really, the context of it and how self-build in the UK compares to other countries. The graph there clearly shows that UK is significantly behind many of the other nations in terms of the availability of units being produced through self-build. There was a survey by the UK Building Societies Association in October 2011, and that identified that 53% of people in the UK would consider building their own home given the opportunity. And clearly there's a significant unmet demand for self-build in the UK, which is evidenced by around 100,000 people subscribing to BuildStore, which is one of the main plot finding websites that most people would probably be aware of. It's highlighted that the key barriers to self-building are obviously land supply and procurement. Access to finance, I think that was mentioned in some of the earlier speakers in terms of the mortgage side of it, in terms of the development side, and some of the costs that are associated with the development. So some upfront costs in terms of highways can really scupper the cash flow on a project. Planning has been seen as a difficulty in getting through the red tape, and that clearly can put people off or make opportunities a little bit more difficult for people in considering self-build as a scheme themselves. So what is Self-Build Wales? Why has it been considered? So it's there to support home ownership. As we said earlier, launched about a year ago. Development Bank for Wales is managing the scheme, but obviously it's supported quite extensively by Welsh Government as an initiative. It gives people a chance to move away from having to sort of buy from the traditional volume builders, and enables people from a cash flow perspective to get into the market for self-build at an affordable level. And again, affordable is something which perhaps we can discuss later on, but it's enabling people to get into the system of self-build that is what's defined in this sort of documentation as affordable. So in terms of a little bit more detail on it, a self-build development loan is administered by Development Bank for Wales. The maximum term for the loan is a period of 2 years. And during that period, there are no repayments on the loan. So it's all capitalised until the end of the project, at the point that a mortgage is put in place to redeem that loan. It'll be on a drawdown basis throughout the scheme. So it'll be staged payments made as the scheme proceeds. And there are certain rules and regulations. You are not in a position to rent the home or sell it for a minimum of 5 years post completion. So that's obviously to avoid people running through the scheme just to build and sell or to build and rent. It's there for home ownership as opposed to investment as a property. Contractors must be approved by the Development Bank, and the system they're currently using for approval of builders is the trust mark system. Clearly, the fact that there are no repayments in terms of the development period, takes away much of the strain in having to repay a development loan and a mortgage. So those can sometimes be quite expensive with higher interest rates applicable to them. So the building process is sometimes expensive because of that. The payment of the key stages then, what's tied into the scheme is that the applicant must use the local authority building control officers, and they will be doing a sign-off against the stages of construction. So the bank will tie in with the local authority building control before releasing the stage payments. So what sector of the market are we looking at? It's anyone. So it's not really there for, specifically looking at affordable housing. This is for any sector of the market who is able to come through the system. Custom build is an option. I mean, in the breakout room, there were some of the discussions I had with people there about specific needs of perhaps families, people who have mobility problems, disabilities. So custom build to a particular design brief is clearly is an option here where people have specific requirements. Self-build, where people want to have use their skills and experience, that's an option, but that would have to be tied in carefully in discussions with the bank at the outset, just to sort of ensure that people have the necessary skills for what they are hoping to be doing. There are design examples of design available. It's just a general family home that is being produced. It's not designed specifically for someone to build, a palace. It's normal, good quality family homes is the output required. So it's not a money-making scheme, as we mentioned earlier. That you are tied into a 5-year minimum commitment. And I know for some local authorities who are working with this, they have some concerns that perhaps 5 years is too short. So I don't know whether that potentially could be reviewed going forward. But the intention really is not there for someone to make a quick buck in developing and selling. Okay, a little bit on how it works. The scheme pulls together those 4 facets of what is needed in terms of self-build: land acquisition, design and planning, the construction and the financing of it. So how do they do that? Self-Build Wales has its own website, and within the website there is an interactive map outlining what plots are available for application and pending sites that have been identified as suitable for people to be considered in making an application. Each plot will be designated with a plot passport, which identifies what the cost will be to purchase the plot and any specific property designs or any planning implications that will apply to that particular site. So the local authority, again, will have quite a significant input at that stage in addressing what would be considered as suitable for that area. In relation to selection of candidates, then the local authority will make an assessment against applications received showing an interest for the individual plots. And applicants will be judged against the priorities set in the plot passport. And another element which is a priority is energy efficiency. So people who are seeking to develop properties with high energy efficiency will be prioritized over other candidates. In terms of affordability, the bank will conduct an affordability assessment of the successful applicant, so that at the end of the process, it's important that that individual can actually secure a mortgage for the outstanding loan against the plot at that point in time. In relation to design, in some instances, it's anticipated that the local authority or housing association, who can also be involved in this, might have obtained at least an outline planning consent. So, there isn't any risk that anyone expressing an interest in the plot is going to get planning turned down. However, there's likely to be a list of design elements which need to be adhered to. So you may be required to actually comply with maybe roof or wall covering design, i.e. type of materials or colours, that would, you know, from the outer aspect of the dwelling. Obviously more scope for the internals in terms of design. The priorities from the local authority, they will all obviously be listed as part of the passport, so you can actually look and pick and choose plots which perhaps meet your objectives, and obviously steer away from anything where the local authority's requirements don't meet what you're looking for. There'll be a deadline for an application, and at the end of the period, obviously, there will be a decision made as to who's selected for the plots. Where there are suggested designs provided, then there'll also be estimates provided of what the likely completed property value would be, you know, if it proceeds along that particular design. Okay, looking at the land, so it's quite prescriptive currently that the primary route for the land will be through local authorities and housing associations. Maybe Arfon at the end can deal a little bit more about private land opportunities and where we're going with that. But certainly in North Wales, there are sort of less opportunities coming forward. And I understand Arfon's been looking at whether there's scope for some private land being brought forward. I think that is a likelihood that it could well be that there may well be opportunities in South Wales along the same lines. As I'll highlight a bit later on in the presentation, that there is a limit as to what is available immediately for people to apply for. So as mentioned earlier, the land is identified on the website, and it is coded red, amber and green. The last time I looked at the website, there were a significant number of red sites there, unfortunately. I'm sure COVID is not helping the process with local authorities being distracted to be coping with you know, issues around COVID, that a lot of work has been sidelined. But the process is that the local authority will examine the opportunities that are there in terms of sites, then look at the planning options that are available, and sites moving into amber at the point that they achieve outline planning. And at the point that the scheme is ready for bids from interested self-builders, then they're obviously classed as green and available for you to bid for the individual plots. I mentioned earlier there's a design guide with 30+ house types in it, so it can certainly help you in relation to selecting a house design that you feel is appropriate. And I understand there's going to be guidance there in terms of costs associated with the various types. Obviously, you know, the final design is down to an individual applicant. So, you know, in some instances, you may be hampered that you must fit in with a requirement of a local authority. In others, you know, there may be more scope for an individual design to be applied to the plot. But all of this is, you know, considered as part of the application process, and the selection criteria then from the local authority would reflect all of these criteria. Suggestion that there might be assistance in securing the full planning. You know how difficult it is to get planning consent in some instances. So I think this is quite novel that a local authority is you know, in a position to help with securing a planning application in this instance. Construction-wise, the way the scheme is being looked at is that builders merchants are being trained. There will be specific advisors in each significant size builders merchants throughout Wales, so that the builders merchants are aware of the scheme, and when self-builders are making contact in terms of supply, then there is an understanding there of the scheme itself. Approved builders, Trustmark or suitable alternative. Trustmark is the only one at the minute that's approved. I know that the bank will be looking at other alternatives potentially for that. And at the outset, the price and schedule for the build will be agreed with the bank, so that there isn't a scenario where a plot is allocated and then issues with the scheduling and pricing arise at a later date. There will be a requirement between the self-builder and the contractor that there's a formal JCT building contract, and that there is a contract administrator employed to oversee the work itself. And as mentioned earlier, the bank will fund all costs directly to the builder, so there isn't any issue about dealing with the finance by the self-builders themselves. Looking at the finance then in particular, there are accredited mortgage advisors, again, people who will be receive some training on the detail of the scheme, because obviously this is quite novel. So there are going to be people out there who will understand the requirements of the scheme to advise on mortgages longer term. In relation to entry into the scheme, this is quite advantageous, and this is where I perhaps mentioned earlier that the definition of affordability in this instance is an affordable way to go into self-build. So the applicant only needs to find 25% of the plot costs. So, if you consider the alternative of going out to the market yourself to buy a plot and build, the fact that there's only 25% of the plot cost that needs to be found up front, that is a significant saving going forward. So the 75% of the plot is picked up by the bank, and 100% of the development costs are covered by the bank. So the only requirement in terms of affordability then, and again, this is quite a good viewpoint being taken by the bank on this matter, is an expectation that the overall scheme for the plot development will achieve a 75% loan to value in relation to the mortgage required. So it gives you 25% equity in the property at the end, as long as you can obviously afford the mortgage. And in relation to the loan itself, there's a maximum 24-month loan term, so there's a 2-year period to get it built. Obviously that starts from the time that the scheme is ready to go. So it's not from when you start entering discussions with the bank or the planning side of things. The requirement that you can't sell or rent for a 5-year period, that will be contained in an overage agreement, so that that will be a legal requirement preventing you from renting or selling the property. A little bit of statistics then, just to finish off. In relation to what is available out there, these are the sites that have been identified within the local authorities who are part of the scheme at the minute. I need to apologise because this information is probably a couple of months old. I do know that the work that Arfon's doing is bringing on board other local authorities to sort of take part in the scheme. So as it stood the last time I looked, there were 29 sites available on the site in those local authorities. Cardiff has got a 0, but Cardiff has actually started off with, there is one scheme up and running in Cardiff currently. and those are the local authorities who are sort of a bit slower off the mark. But I'm sure that in the fullness of time, they will be coming forward with sites and schemes which can, fit into the self-build initiative. If we just firm up a little bit more on the costs, I mentioned the only contribution you need is 25% of the cost of the plot purchase. However, you will have fees that will be payable. So the bank has an arrangement fee of 1.25% to enter the scheme, and an exit fee of 1.25%. So those are costs that the bank will charge. In relation to the development period interest, there's a range of percentages, but that will be calculated on a risk assessment of the scheme that you're proposing. The bank does state that the majority of these will be an interest rate of 5%. And over and above that, then valuation fees and solicitors' fees that obviously you will have to bear yourselves as part of the purchase and negotiation of mortgage. Very quickly, just a summary in terms of, why is this scheme suitable for community-led housing? Why should you consider it? So some of the benefits, if you're going into it and you find that there's a plot there that you like, there's some certainty of planning, whereas, going to the market, you've obviously got to go through the system of planning application. So there's some certainty there starting off. There is scope for local development companies to assist with site finding. There is discussion now of maybe appointing some in North and South Wales to achieve that. Certainty of scheme viability. Well, if there's a 75% loan to value agreed with the bank up front, then if you can afford that mortgage, then there's the viability is there. And in order to achieve the 75% loan to value, the factor that will be considered for that is land cost. So local authorities or housing associations proposing land will have to reduce the cost of the land in order to achieve the 75% viability. So that's how that will be achieved. Financial risks clearly will be reduced, subject to you being able to afford the mortgage. The contract element of it, the bank will be assisting and liaising with the building control, so that the finance will flow to the contractor from the bank. Something I've been doing a little bit of work on, and maybe this can develop a bit further, is whether as community-led housing movement that we can sort of try to partner it with local authorities and housing associations to get some sites prioritised for community-led housing. And that certainly, if that can be achieved, then certainly that will take away the competition element, because clearly this is quite it's quite an affordable scheme, which obviously will make significant high demand for it. Developer profits are removed, so you're not you're taking out what would normally be a developer profit in a traditional state of housing. The advantage that the land value is adjusted to ensure viability clearly is a significant advantage. There is a secondary element to this, where the bank has got capital money available to enable site development work to be carried out prior to handing over to self-builders. So if there's remediation work needed on a site before it's suitable for development, then there is some additional funding available to enable that to happen. And lastly, picking up on some of the points made with the other two speakers earlier, there's scope for sweat equity. So self-build or self-finish are options as long as we meet certain criteria with the bank to achieve that. quickly go through disadvantages. As I mentioned earlier, there's significant demand. There's already, well, okay, a couple of months ago, there were 1,700 inquiries, with 700 being plot specific. So, you know, there's competition out there for the scheme. There's currently no potential for you to bring a site into the scheme. But again, we will be looking to speak to the bank and to Welsh Government on that to see whether community-led identified sites can be an exception to that. So rental is not an option. So in terms of what we are looking at with housing co-ops, there's a bit of a debate again needed with Welsh Government to have some clarity on that, just to see whether community land trusts and co-ops can take advantage of it where there are rental options available within their scheme. So this is specifically to, you know, get self-built plots available. So what we are attempting to do, and hopefully will be successful, is a variation on it to some extent to enable some specific sites allocated to community-led housing. The last disadvantage really is local authorities are in the driving seat in terms of prioritization. So it just really does depend in whichever area you're looking at, what the priority of that local authority is going forward. So I think that's about it from me. So if there are any questions, I'll stop sharing the screen, and I'm sure we can receive questions from people on all three presentations.
Thanks, Dai and Arfon. Really good overview of the programme and opportunities for community-led housing in Wales. I'm really conscious of time, so we've gone over a little bit. But if anybody's got any burning questions for any of our speakers, perhaps we could, you know, maybe take 3 questions, 1 for each sort of presentation. But if anybody does have any further questions, then I'm happy for you to email me, and perhaps I can forward them on to the speakers, and then we can I can send the sort of responses out. So any burning questions first of all? Tracy, you've got a hand up there. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, the land availability, I did note that it's with local authority mainly that you were saying, but have any discussions been made on potential sites with Land Division Welsh Government to date?
I'm aware that there is scope for expanding the sourcing of land, because obviously local authorities have a limited supply themselves, and now that they are setting up their own housing companies, they're actually building on that land. So I guess this scheme is competing with local authorities for their own land. I think there will be scope for other Welsh Government land, for Health Authority land, and yeah, there is discussion for private sites to be introduced. However, from a private land for the 75% loan to value, it may be that, you know, the private owner won't be willing to accept, you know, the lower value to enable it to work at 75% loan to value. So it's a new scheme. You know, I think there will be more opportunity, more scope for land coming forward in the future. But I guess part of what, you know, the COVID situation is that a lot of things have gone a bit slower in the last year.
Thank you.
Thanks both. I'm trying to see a hand up there with Katie. I can just about see your silhouette.
Yeah, sorry about the silhouette. It just caught there that it's not suitable for rental, and I understand the reasons for that. But I'm wondering, would the scheme look at a community land trust as a single entity, so that the community land trust could have a mixed tenure of self-owned and some rental properties within an entire, like a co-housing project?
That's certainly something that we are hoping to have discussions with the bank and Welsh Government on currently, because I mean, the ruling when we speak to the bank on this is that rental is not allowed. However, if a community land trust is making an application, the land trust in itself will be borrowing for the development, and rental is obviously part of a subsidiary agreement. So you're not acting as an individual landlord in that scenario. So yeah, I mean, you know, a land trust and a housing co-op would both fit into those sort of scenarios. And certainly the feedback I've had from local authorities is that, you know, the more this can be made affordable, then the greater the benefit. So I'm hopeful that will be something to be considered. Yeah. I don't know if Arfon's got comments.
Well, I agree with you, really. I think that it's work in progress on that front, I think, isn't it? So I think, but at the moment, it's for individuals that they're looking at trying to support. So I think work needs to be carried on with a discussion about how that can be achieved.
Yeah, I definitely think it's something that we're going to be discussing with local authorities over the next couple of months. And I think just one last question from Sarah. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I couldn't find that put your hand up button. Yeah, just one thing I wanted to ask was, I know one of the reasons that local authorities and housing associations, you know, one of the barriers perhaps to them putting land forward has been that in order for people to get a mortgage from the bank at the end, a section 106 stops them doing that. And so in a way, people don't want a 106 on that, but then obviously that prevents that land, if you like, sort of staying as affordable, you know, moving on. Whereas obviously it's a priority for the local housing associations and the local authority for that land to sort of stay affordable. So it'd just be interesting to hear your thoughts on that, but also wondering if there's a place for community-led housing and potentially, for example, a community land trust to sort of play a role in sort of being able to sort out that tension slightly and therefore being able to sort of create opportunities for it to happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. First part of the answer, the 75% loan to value brings in a degree of affordability. The model I'd like to see is that, you know, that's retained in perpetuity, and, you know, that can be a shared equity model then in its own right. So I think that is a good selling point for community-led housing to be, you know, arguing the case to the local authority and Welsh Government. But I mean, if you sort of package on to that a home buy option, you know, as part of the scheme, so we achieve 75% loan to value at the end of the project, and then tack on a home buy option with some, you know, grant coming into that. Then, you know, you're bringing it into, you know, a significantly affordable home, and, you know, that's money that's available in any event as part of, you know, the social housing programme. So, I mean, you know, working the bank and the grant together, I think, can come up with a very interesting model.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah. Great. So, sorry that we've gone over everybody, but just want to say a quick thank you to all our speakers. So Anna, Allan and David and Arfon, really appreciate you joining us today. So just a quick sort of mention of our next network. So it's going to be in April, obviously, and it will be around sort of design for community-led housing. Following straight on from that session, actually in April, we're also running some workshop sessions on the total process of actually building and developing your homes with our very own Dave Palmer. So I'll send out some information about that following the meeting. And also our sort of a plug for our May network as well. We're celebrating a big birthday in the cooperative world. So we'll be celebrating Robert Owen's 250th birthday, I believe. So we'll be talking a lot about Robert Owen and sort of the movement that he created. And also just to mention Brontleys Wellbeing Park. They've got a session with the Wellbeing Future Generations Office next Wednesday, I believe the 24th, to talk about sort of wellbeing plans for Brontleys. And then on April the 27th as well, they're also launching their 10-year plan, which is really, really exciting. Again, I'll share details of those upcoming events. So we've got a packed couple of months of really exciting events coming up. So I'll let you get on with your days now. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Also, just to add to that, on April the 7th, we've got the Mid Wales local meetup, which we'll send details about. So that's for anybody who's specifically in Paris and Ceredigion, I guess, and to come along to and talk about local housing issues and community-led housing.
Wow, thanks for that reminder, Alan. And actually, that's also reminded me that we're launching our research on the 30th of March, which has looked at how cooperative and community-led housing schemes have dealt with the coronavirus pandemic. So that's a really exciting piece of research that we'll be launching. Again, I will send out links for all of these events. There's lots going on. But for now, thank you very much for joining us. Diolch yn fawr, and I'll see you all soon.
Bye, thank you.
Well, take care.
Thanks all.